There is a very common illusion after leaving a relationship with a narcissist. The person who comes after me will be happier than I was. That illusion not only adds to your pain, it also keeps you trapped in a comparison that was never fair to begin with. Because the truth is this: in a narcissist's world, there is no one who comes later and lives better. There are only people who, one by one, step deeper into a shadow the narcissist refuses to face. The new person does not enter a fresh beginning. They enter the same old cycle, but at a darker and deeper level. From a Jungian perspective, the shadow does not disappear simply because we change the mirror. It only changes the way it expresses itself. When you leave, what disappears is not love or attachment, but the reflective surface that allowed the narcissist to temporarily avoid seeing their inner emptiness. And when that mirror is gone, they are forced to find another surface to reflect themselves, the person they call the new supply. What the new person does not realize is this: each time the shadow returns, it does not come back weaker, but more aggressive and more shameless. At first, everything looks like a victory story. The love bombing is more intense, the promises are bigger, the attention is thicker and more overwhelming. But this is not because the new person is more special than you. It is because the narcissist has to perform harder to hide a truth that is becoming increasingly difficult to conceal. They are running out of the ability to sustain the illusion. The mask that once survived thanks to your patience, compassion, and emotional energy is now forced to strain in panic, and a mask worn out of fear always falls faster. This is where the paradox lies. The new person does not receive a better version of the narcissist. They receive the full weight of the shadow that has been repressed, accumulated, and never healed. They do not step into the role of the one who is loved, but sooner or later are pushed into the role of the one who carries. Carrying boredom, carrying failure, carrying the anger born from the fact that you left and did not collapse. In that psychological structure, the new person is not the winner. They are the place where the shadow is unloaded. And when you truly understand this, something very important begins to happen. The story no longer revolves around who was chosen, but around who was awake enough to leave the cycle. This video is not meant to make you pity the new person, nor to keep you waiting for karma to arrive. It exists to help you see a deeper truth. You were not replaced, you escaped. And that moment is the true dividing line between a life lived as a reflection and a life lived in sovereignty. Part 1. The new person did not win you. They only arrived later in a game that was already rotten. The first thing that needs to be made clear plainly, without false comfort, is this. Within the psychological structure of a narcissist, the concept of a winner does not exist. There are only people who are successively pulled into the same system, a system powered by illusion, control, and the avoidance of the self. When you see a new person appear, publicly adored, openly cherished, crowned with the title of destiny, the most natural response is comparison, followed by the question, was I not good enough? But that very question quietly places you back into the old position, the position of someone still measuring their worth through the narcissist's gaze. The truth is this: the new person is not chosen because they are better, but because they have not yet seen the truth. In the narcissist's eyes, the new person is simply a clean, reflective surface, uncracked, unmarked, untouched by memories of prior collapse, and so they become the ideal tool for the narcissist to continue sustaining the illusion of a self that is special, desired, and always replaceable. This is not love. It is a survival strategy of a fragile ego. In the early stage, the new person is often given exactly what you once longed for: constant presence, clear promises about the future, consistent attention, the feeling of being chosen without hesitation. What few people realize, however, is that these gestures do not come from the narcissist's growth, but from their escalating fear. fear of being exposed as empty, fear of being seen through, fear of being alone with themselves. Because you left, they are forced to perform more intensely to reassure themselves that they still control the narrative. This is why love bombing with a new person is often faster, heavier, and more dramatic. But this escalation is not a sign of a healthier beginning. It is a sign of a system losing stability. A psychologically healthy structure does not need to constantly prove, display, or dramatize itself. Only fractured systems require a spotlight to hide the cracks within. And when the new person is placed on that stage, they are not the protagonist of a new story. They are a replacement actor in an old play. Here is the crucial point. The narcissist does not enter a new relationship with less emptiness than before they enter with more darkness. The failures with you, the moments of lost control, the times you saw through them, left or stopped reacting, all of it accumulates. And when the new person arrives, they do not receive a merely unhealed version of the narcissist. They receive the bitterness, defensiveness, and resentment that were never processed. So, if there is one thing you need to understand from the start, it is this. The new person did not take anything that belonged to you. They simply stepped into the exact position you left, a position designed for someone to carry the narcissist's inner emptiness. And when you are no longer there to act as the mirror, to regulate emotions, to hold the mask in place, the new person will soon realize that what they are holding is not a prize, but a heavy role that will eventually crush them. In the next part, we will go deeper into why this mask collapses faster with a new person, and why each cycle becomes more brutal than the one before. Not because you were less valuable, but because you were the last one with enough energy to keep the illusion alive. Part 2. Why the mask collapses faster with a new person. If part 1 helped you see that the new person did not win you, but merely arrived later in a decaying structure, this part addresses a deeper question. Why do later relationships with the same narcissist always collapse faster, more violently, and more cruelly? The answer does not lie in the new person. It lies in the cumulative inner erosion within the narcissist after each cycle. According to Otto Kernberg's analysis, one of the core features of narcissistic personality pathology is ego fragmentation. The narcissist does not possess a stable, continuous sense of self. They survive through patches supplied by admiration, submission, and the emotional regulation provided by others. This leads to a critical consequence. Each relationship does not heal them, it exhausts them further. They must constantly strain to maintain the persona, while the shadow, rage, shame, emptiness continues to accumulate behind it. With you, they still had enough energy to conceal this. You were the one who soothed, explained, waited, adjusted, and absorbed much of their instability. But when you left, it was not just the end of a relationship, it was the collapse of a psychological support pillar. When the new person enters, the narcissist must rebuild the mask from a more fatigued and fragile inner state. As a result, the mask is no longer worn with confidence. It is held together by panic. Heinz Kohut's theories add another crucial layer of understanding. Kohut described how narcissists depend heavily on self-objects, people who function to maintain their sense of self-worth. When a self-object withdraws or fails to reflect them properly, the narcissist experiences what is called a narcissistic injury, often followed by narcissistic rage. The key point is this, that rage does not disappear when a new person arrives. It is merely postponed. This means the new person does not enter a blank slate, but a psychological space already contaminated by prior failure. They carry a burden they do not even know exists. The rage born from the fact that you left without collapsing. And because a narcissist cannot punish you, you are no longer within reach. That rage must be redirected. As Kernberg described through classical defense mechanisms, this is displacement. The new person becomes the target of what never belonged to them. This explains a paradox many people observe. The narcissist may appear to treat the new person well for a short time, but quickly becomes irritable, cold, contemptuous, and excessively controlling. Not because the new person did something wrong, but because the mask is now carrying too much unresolved inner pressure. Once that pressure exceeds a threshold, the persona fractures and the shadow floods out, unchecked. At a deeper level, this is what Carl Jung described as possession by the shadow. When the shadow is neither recognized nor integrated, it does not vanish, it takes control. As a result, each subsequent cycle does not merely repeat, it escalates. Less patience, less empathy, less ability to conceal. And the new person, instead of receiving a better version, is the first to absorb the raw, unregulated one. So if you have ever wondered why the new person seems to be treated badly so quickly, the answer does not lie in their worth, and certainly not in any supposed lack of yours. It lies in this truth. You were the last person with enough energy to keep the mask standing. When you left, the collapse had already begun. The new person simply happened to be standing in the wrong place when the final wall came down. In the next part, we will examine the most brutal transformation in this cycle, when the new person is pushed from the role of prize into that of scapegoat, and why this shift is nearly inevitable within the narcissistic psychological structure. Part 3. From prize to scapegoat, when the shadow needs a place to dump blame. When the idealization phase ends, a relationship with a narcissist does not move into a natural process of maturation like a healthy relationship would. Instead, it shifts into a different function. At this stage, the new person no longer exists to be loved or admired, but to serve the increasingly fractured inner stability of the narcissist. The transition from prize to scapegoat does not occur because of an external event, but because the internal structure requires an object to absorb tension. Within the narcissistic psychological system, the ego has no capacity to contain failure. When the initial promises no longer deliver a sense of omnipotence, the narcissist is forced to face an irreconcilable contradiction. The perfect self-image they believe in no longer aligns with reality. But instead of adjusting that image, they externalize the conflict. The person who is closest, most invested, and least defended becomes the recipient of that contradiction. It is precisely at this point that the new person begins to be assigned a completely different role. They are no longer seen as a source of pleasure, but as the cause of discomfort. Every state of instability, boredom, irritation, emptiness, disorientation needs a concrete reason to exist. And in narcissistic logic, that reason is never "I have a problem," but always "you made me this way." The new person gradually becomes the bearer of blame, not because they caused the problem, but because the system needs somewhere to deposit it. From Carl Jung's framework, when the shadow is not recognized, it is projected onto others. What matters here is this: projection does not seek out the worst person. It seeks the most available carrier. The new person often occupies exactly that position, still attached enough to care, still trusting enough to doubt themselves, and not yet distant enough to realize they are being used as a psychological regulation structure. The result is a very characteristic reversal. The very qualities that once elevated the new person, care, sensitivity, flexibility, willingness to listen, now become grounds for criticism. They are labeled too emotional, too demanding, unstable, even though these same traits were encouraged in the early phase. This is not unconscious inconsistency. It is the narcissistic system reorganizing itself to preserve power. At this stage, the relationship no longer operates through connection, but through load balancing. The new person must carry more, so the narcissist can carry less. They begin to take on emotional regulation, peacekeeping, explaining, soothing, fixing, not because they are explicitly asked to, but because failing to do so results in coldness, irritation, or contempt. Gradually, they stop asking, "Is this relationship good for me?" and begin asking only, "What am I still not doing well enough?" What makes the scapegoat role so stable is the inversion of responsibility. The narcissist does not need to be openly cruel. They only need to remain ambiguous enough for the new person to assume responsibility on their behalf. When the new person starts believing that if they were better, the relationship would be fine, the system has successfully transferred the shadow. The narcissist feels lighter. The new person becomes heavier. Thus, the shift from prize to scapegoat is not a personal tragedy, but a structural operation within narcissistic personality dynamics. It happens not because the new person did something wrong, but because the shadow needs somewhere to reside. And in a system without self-awareness, that place is always the one who is closest, most caring, and least suspicious. In the next part, we will examine what happens when the new person begins to burn out and can no longer sustain this role, and why it is precisely at that moment that the narcissist often turns to seek another anchor to keep the collapsing structure intact. Part 4. When the scapegoat can no longer carry. Why the narcissist seeks a new source. Once the new person has been fully pushed into the role of scapegoat, the narcissistic system enters a critical phase. Overload. Not overload from loving too much, but from dumping the shadow for too long without sufficient capacity to contain it. The new person becomes exhausted, resists, withdraws energy, or worse, they stop reacting strongly enough. And in narcissistic structure, lack of reaction equals loss of control. At this stage, what the narcissist faces is not the fear of losing the relationship, but a deeper fear, losing the place where the shadow is discharged. When the new person can no longer carry that role due to exhaustion, awakening, or simply no longer believing, the narcissist enters a state of clear inner instability. The emptiness returns, but this time without any buffer to soften the impact. In Jungian terms, when a psychological structure cannot integrate the shadow, it is forced to continually seek external containers. And when the current container no longer functions, the system does not repair itself, it looks for a new container. This is where hoovering appears, not as an emotional act, but as a survival reflex of the ego. What is crucial to understand is this. Hoovering does not happen because the narcissist misses you, but because the new person can no longer sustain the role of inner regulation. When the current scapegoat begins to collapse, the narcissist must quickly re-establish balance. And in their psychological memory, you once fulfilled that function. You were patient enough, forgiving enough, self-doubting enough to keep the system running. Returning to you, therefore, carries no emotional meaning, it carries functional meaning. At this level, hoovering is often disguised with great subtlety. There are no longer dramatic apologies or grand promises. Instead, there are vague signals, a just checking in message, a reminder of a shared memory, a coincidental appearance at the right moment. The goal is not to pull you back immediately, but to test whether you still reflect. A single small reaction is enough for the system to confirm that the old mirror is still usable. At the same time, the new person is often treated noticeably worse. This is not accidental. Each time the narcissist feels uncertain about control over you, frustration is redirected onto the nearest target. The new person becomes the recipient of the strain of a system trying to maintain multiple sources of reflection simultaneously. This is the stage where escalation is often observed. Tighter control, increased coldness, or silent punishment. What must be emphasized here is this. When hoovering appears, the relationship with the new person has already entered a depletion zone. The narcissist does not return because the new relationship is not good enough, but because it can no longer shield the shadow. And because the narcissist lacks the capacity to be alone with emptiness, they are forced to expand their network of reflection, even if that means manipulating multiple people in parallel. If you look at this section coldly and logically, a very clear truth emerges. No one in this system is chosen because of love, and no one is discarded because love has ended. Every movement revolves around maintaining a fragile inner structure. The new person is merely the current container. You were the previous one. And hoovering is nothing more than a desperate attempt to avoid facing the self. Part 5. When you withdraw from the mirror role, why the cycle only ends here. The decisive point of this entire topic is not how badly the new person is treated, but what finally brings the loop to an end. Because within narcissistic structure, people can be replaced, roles can shift, tactics can be refined, but the system will keep running until there is no reflective surface left that still works. That is why the moment you withdraw from the mirror role is not merely a personal choice, it is a structural event. A narcissist does not exist as a stable, self-sustaining identity. They exist through reactions, attention, and the emotional regulation of other people. As long as you respond, whether with love, explanations, anger, or grief, you are still helping the system operate. But when you withdraw completely, no arguing, no proving, no explaining, no reacting, the system loses the energy source that sustains it. This is not punishment. It is the natural consequence of you stopping a function you were never obligated to provide. From a Jungian perspective, when the persona is no longer reflected from the outside and the shadow is not integrated from the inside, a person enters an existential crisis. For a narcissist, that crisis does not lead to transformation. It leads either to escalating control or to a silent collapse. And what determines which path they take is not what you say, but whether you still participate. That is why, when you truly withdraw from the mirror role, two things happen at once. First, the narcissist loses the ability to define themselves through you. Every question like, who was right, who left whom, who won, who lost, becomes meaningless, because those questions require two participants. Second, everyone else still inside the system, including the new person, must carry the full pressure that was previously dispersed. And that is when the abuse often escalates sharply, not because you disappeared, but because there is nowhere else left to dump it. The important thing is this: you do not need to witness that collapse to know you withdrew correctly. Waiting for karma, monitoring social media, or comparing their life is simply a delayed form of participation in the same system. Real freedom begins when you no longer need to know what is happening to them. Not because you are cold, but because you no longer attach your identity to a structure that was never built to nourish you. At a deeper level, withdrawing from the mirror role is not just leaving a person, it is leaving a psychological position. The one who carries, fixes, endures, and must understand. When that position is vacant, the narcissistic system cannot reproduce itself in the old way. It either finds someone else and repeats the cycle with greater intensity, or it enters a prolonged state of depletion. But whichever scenario unfolds, it no longer belongs to you. And this connects directly to the title of the entire video. The new person gets the worse version, not because you were replaced, but because you exited the only role that gave the shadow somewhere to live. When the mirror disappears, the shadow does not disappear with it. It concentrates on whoever remains. And you, by not looking back, walked out of the labyrinth where every prize eventually becomes a chain. Part 6. The narcissist's final illusion. Why the new person never escapes a worse script. If you follow the logic of this topic all the way to the end, a hard but liberating truth appears. Within narcissistic structure, there is no better relationship version waiting ahead. What exists is only a series of increasingly deteriorating loops. The new person does not enter a different road. They enter a later stage of the same road. And that is the deeper reason they almost always get the worst part, even if the beginning looks more glamorous. The narcissist lives by a core illusion that if they change the person, the circumstances, or the role, they will escape the inner emptiness. But this illusion has a fatal flaw. The source of the problem is not the object, it is the internal structure. Each time a relationship fails, instead of asking, "What did I do?" the narcissistic system draws only one conclusion. Next time, I must choose someone else, easier, more compliant, more tolerant. And that very logic guarantees that the next cycle will be harsher than the previous one. In the later stages of the loop, the narcissist no longer has much psychological capital. Charm becomes mechanical, promises become cliché, control shows up earlier, contempt is no longer hidden with finesse. The new person, because they arrive later, faces a version that is increasingly depleted and defensive. They do not only carry what is happening in the present, they also carry the unprocessed history of the relationships that came before. This creates a crucial paradox. The further along they go, the more the narcissist needs supply, and yet the less capable they are of securing that supply through soft methods. So the system is forced into rougher strategies: fear, guilt, ambiguity, control through instability. This is why many people notice that the new person is pulled into confusion and self-doubt very quickly, while you may have taken years to reach the same point. Not because the new person is weaker, but because the dose of shadow they must absorb is larger from the start. Another overlooked aspect is that the new person is rarely seen as a truly separate individual. In the narcissist's inner world, they are only the next version of a function that already exists. This makes every attempt by the new person to prove themselves, do it differently, or love better essentially meaningless. They are not meeting the narcissist in an open space, they are meeting a pre-written script, and in that script, the final role is always the role of depletion. From Jung's depth perspective, this is a clear sign of the absence of individuation. When someone cannot face and integrate their darkness, their life does not move forward along a developmental axis. It only rotates along an axis of replacement. Change the person, change the role, change the setting, but the core conflict remains intact. So each new relationship is not a next chapter, but a more worn-out copy of the old one. This is where we see the key point clearly. The worst the new person experiences is not a punishment. It is the consequence of a structure reaching its limit. When the system can no longer regenerate healthy energy, it begins to survive by burning through what remains at a faster rate. The new person becomes the last fuel for an engine already worn down. And like every worn engine, it produces more friction, more smoke, more breakdown without ever running smoothly again. This also explains why, at this stage, narcissists often behave in increasingly contradictory ways. They fear abandonment, yet push the person away. They need presence, yet act contemptuous. They want to keep the person, yet prepare a replacement. This is not high-level strategy. It is the signature of a system operating under constant strain. And in that strain, anyone inside will be harmed more severely than those who came before. If there is one logical conclusion to draw from this entire section, it is this: the new person is never the solution to the narcissist's problem. They are only the latest evidence that the problem was never solved. And that is why your absence from that cycle is not a loss. It is leaving at the right moment from a system that is already decaying. This section is not meant to make you feel lucky that someone else is suffering instead. It is meant to bring you to a deeper recognition. No one wins in this structure. The new person does not win. The old person does not lose. There are only those who keep participating and those who have left. And the difference between those two groups is not human worth. It is whether someone is still trapped in the illusion that next time will be different. By the end of this journey, there is a truth that needs to be stated clearly and without avoidance. The new person does not get the worse outcome because you lost. but because a narcissistic structure can only survive by damaging those who remain inside it. This is not personal fate, nor is it some mystical form of karma. It is the logical consequence of a psychological system that lacks the capacity for self-awareness and self-transformation. In that world, the prize was never love. It was a role, and every role within that structure has an expiration date. When the new person enters, they do not step into a beginning. They step into a later stage of the same loop, one in which the shadow is heavier, the pressure is greater, and the ability to conceal has weakened. That is why deterioration is not an anomaly. It is the default destination. In the spirit of Carl Jung, any system that refuses to face the shadow is forced to project it outward onto the world. As long as there is someone willing to stand in the mirror position, that system still has a reason to continue. But the moment the mirror disappears, the shadow does not disappear with it. It concentrates on those who remain. That is why the new person carries more, and also why you do not need to witness it to know that your decision was right. What is most liberating here is this: you do not need to prove that you were right, nor do you need to wait for someone else to be wrong. You do not need to watch, compare, or wonder whether the new person is happier than you. Those questions belong to a game you have already left. When you stop participating, the game loses its opponent and its power collapses quietly. So let us end with a crucial redefinition of winning. Winning is not being chosen. Winning is not being missed. Winning is not watching someone else suffer consequences. Winning is no longer being pulled into a structure that requires you to lose yourself in order to survive. Winning is when your life no longer revolves around who is beside them, but around who you are becoming when you no longer have to reflect for anyone. If you once felt pain when you saw the new person appear, remember this: that pain does not say you were less valuable. It says you once carried a role that was far too heavy within a system that was never fair. Your leaving did not allow someone else to replace you. It simply caused that structure to reveal its true nature more quickly to those who came after. And when you stand here no longer needing comparison, no longer needing explanation, no longer needing response, a quiet but powerful truth emerges. Every prize in the narcissistic world eventually turns into chains. Only those who step outside become truly free.